AITA for sharing my ex's medical secrets with the boss she left me for? I am 29 years old, and up until that moment, I shared my life with Jessica, who is 27. Our relationship had lasted for almost 4 years. We met at a company mixer when both of us were just starting our careers. From the very first moment, her personality caught my attention. Jessica was ambitious, spoke with great confidence, and was always meticulous about the image she projected. That attitude was what attracted me the most in the beginning. She seemed to be very clear about what she wanted for her future. During the first 2 years, everything was quite stable. We both worked, split the rent on our apartment, and although we weren't a perfect couple, we usually managed to work things out. I have an administrative job, my salary is steady, but it's not particularly high. Jessica, on the other hand, works in sales for an import company, where a large part of her income depends on commissions that can vary greatly from one month to the next. The first major change appeared when she got a promotion. After that, her direct supervisor, Mark, started including her in more important meetings and on business trips. Every time she returned from one of those trips, she would tell stories about lavish hotels, exclusive restaurants, and clients with lifestyles that, according to her, were on another level. At first, it didn't seem strange to me. I figured it was normal for her to start moving in different circles as she advanced in her career. However, over time, her comments stopped feeling like simple anecdotes and started sounding more like comparisons. One night, I was looking at photos on her phone from a steakhouse she had gone to with her team. As she swiped through the images, she said, "Some men really know how to spoil a woman." At that moment, I chose to ignore it. I thought it had just been an impulsive comment. As the weeks went by, she began repeating another phrase quite often: "I have expensive tastes." She would say it at different times, when we talked about vacation plans, when she saw a neighbor's new SUV, or even when we walked past a designer boutique. I tried to adapt to the situation. I started taking on more overtime at work and looked for some freelance projects to earn extra money. Not because she asked me to directly, but because I felt that if I didn't do something, I would end up being left behind. The problem was that her expectations were growing much faster than I could afford. The moment that really changed everything happened on a Friday night. We had planned to go out to dinner that day to celebrate our anniversary. I made a reservation at a nice Italian restaurant that was within my budget. It wasn't a 5-star place, but it was cozy and had great reviews online. As soon as we walked in, I noticed her expression. "Here?" she asked, not even trying to hide her disappointment. I tried to explain that the place was quiet and the food was highly rated. She sat down, but throughout the entire dinner, she kept looking around with obvious disinterest. When we returned to the apartment, she finally said what was on her mind. "I don't understand why you settle for so little," she commented. Then she added something I still remember exactly. "I wasn't born for this. I have expensive tastes and you can't handle that." We argued for over an hour, but that phrase was the one that stayed burned into my memory, not just because of the words, but because of the way she said them. She didn't seem angry. She spoke with complete certainty, as if she were stating an obvious fact. I tried to stay calm. I reminded her that our relationship had started from nothing. I never promised her a life of luxury, but I did promise her stability, respect, and support. Jessica replied that this was no longer enough for her. "I want to be with someone who is on my level," she said at the end. "And if you can't be, it's not my fault." That night, she ended up sleeping on the couch. The next morning, she acted as if nothing had happened, although I felt that something between us had already broken. In the following week, she started coming home later and later from work. She said she had meetings, client dinners, or company events. I had no proof of anything, but the distance between us was obvious. We hardly spoke. It also caught my attention how she started mentioning Mark, her boss. Before, she did it with a certain formality. Now, she began calling him just by his first name, as if their relationship were much closer. One afternoon, while getting ready in front of the mirror, she commented, "Mark says I should aim higher. He thinks I have the potential for something much bigger." I didn't know how to interpret that. It could have been about her career or her personal life. The defining moment arrived on a random Tuesday. I left work early that day because of a pounding headache. When I walked into our apartment, I found several of her suitcases open on the bed. Jessica was calmly folding clothes. "Are you going on a trip?" I asked. She didn't even look up. "I'm moving out," she replied. Then she explained that she had decided to leave. According to her, she needed a different environment and someone who truly understood her aspirations. There were no tears or drama, just a cold, calculated decision. Finally, she added, Mark offered to let me stay in his guest room while I find my own place. I felt a mix of disbelief and humiliation. I didn't have to ask if something was going on between them. Her decision said it all. So this is about him, I said. Jessica sighed as if I were oversimplifying things. It's for me, she replied. He can give me the life I want. You can't. That was the last real conversation we had as a couple. In less than 2 hours, she had taken almost all of her things. She only left a few boxes that she said she would pick up later. The following days were strange. The apartment seemed bigger and much quieter. I cycled through a range of emotions: anger, sadness, and disbelief. But what was hardest for me to accept was the feeling that I had been evaluated and discarded like a product that didn't meet specifications. A few days later, a mutual friend confirmed what I already suspected. Jessica was living with Mark. Apparently, their relationship hadn't started suddenly. It had been developing for some time. At that point, my intention was simply to move on. I didn't want any drama, but the story didn't end there. 2 weeks after Jessica left, I received a text from her. She didn't write to apologize or to talk about what had happened. Her message was only to ask for some documents that, according to her, she had left in the apartment. Among those papers were several sealed envelopes with recent medical results. Weeks before, she had told me she was planning to get some blood work done. At the time, she said it was just for a routine physical. When she asked for the documents, I told her she could swing by the apartment whenever she wanted to pick them up, but she replied that she was too busy and preferred that I have them sent by a courier. I couldn't explain why, but that request gave me a strange feeling. Maybe because it was the first time she had contacted me since she left, and she did so with such a detached tone, as if I were just some errand boy. I told her I would think about it and let her know the next day. That same night, I looked at the envelopes she had left behind. At first, I didn't plan to open them. I felt I had no right. However, I noticed that one of them was poorly sealed, just enough to see that it wasn't solely about standard lab tests. That started a chain of thought that ended up changing everything. Up until that moment, I had tried to accept the breakup and move forward, taking responsibility for my part in what happened. But holding those documents and knowing who she was with now, I began to wonder if I had truly been the only one who had failed in our relationship. It was at that moment that I made a decision I know many people might judge. Between curiosity and a growing resentment, my better judgment failed me. I opened the envelope that was already half open. Inside, I found several printed lab reports. Most were for standard medical tests, a complete blood count, a metabolic panel, and some hormonal studies. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But then other results appeared that I didn't expect to see. There was a drug screening, which surprised me a little. Then I remembered Jessica mentioning her company was doing extra screenings for their insurance policy. However, the document that really put a knot in my stomach was another one. On the page, there was an acronym I didn't recognize at first, VDRL. I didn't know what it meant, so I grabbed my phone and searched for it online. In a matter of seconds, I understood. It was a screening test for syphilis. I felt my stomach drop. I looked at the result again and again, hoping I had misread it, but there was no doubt. Where it should have said non-reactive, the result clearly indicated reactive, positive. I sat there for several minutes without moving. My first thought was about the past month. During that time, Jessica and I had been intimate, not often, because we were already distant, but it had happened. The next thought was inevitable. If this test was recent, then the infection must be too. Without thinking, I took pictures of all the documents, especially the page showing the positive VDRL result. I acted on pure impulse. I texted the images to her. Not even 2 minutes passed before my phone started ringing. It was her. I answered. "Why did you open that?" she said immediately, without even a hello. Her voice no longer sounded so confident. She was clearly rattled. "What is this, Jessica?" I asked, ignoring her question. There were a few seconds of silence. "I don't know," she finally replied. "I didn't know about it." "It's positive," I said, trying to stay calm, although my voice was shaking. "And we were together this month." I heard her breathing nervously on the other end. "It has to be a mistake," she said. "Sometimes those tests give false positives. Until it's confirmed, It doesn't mean anything. But her tone didn't convey certainty. It conveyed fear. How long have you known this was a possibility? I asked. I didn't, she repeated. Please, don't do anything with that. I was going to pick them up tomorrow. Then I brought up what was really bothering me. You moved in with your boss. Does he know about this? Her reaction was immediate. Don't you dare send him anything. I'm begging you. Why? I replied. If it's nothing, there shouldn't be a problem. There was another silence, longer this time. Please, she insisted. Just don't. Do this one last thing for me. She even offered to pay me if I kept quiet. That infuriated me more than the result itself. It wasn't just about a potential health issue. It was the fact that her first instinct was to hide it. Who was it? I asked directly. It wasn't Mark, she replied quickly. You don't know what you're talking about. Then explain it to me. It was at that moment that she confessed something I didn't expect. She told me that a few weeks ago, she had gone out for drinks with some coworkers. Afterwards, they ended up at a nightclub. According to her, she met a man there. She had had too much to drink and made a poor decision. It was just one time, she added. Afterward, I felt off, but I thought it was just in my head. She didn't give me the man's name or many details. She just kept repeating that it hadn't been Mark. That explanation didn't calm me down. It had the opposite effect. It confirmed that while we were still technically together, she had been with someone else, and now there was a diagnosis that could affect me, too. So you cheated on me, I said flatly. We were already in a bad place, she replied. Don't change the subject. But for me, that was the entire subject. The conversation ended when I told her I needed time to think. I hung up without saying goodbye. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing. On one hand, there was the fear for my own health, and on the other, the raw anger of betrayal. The logical thing to do was to get tested as soon as possible, but emotionally, I wanted her to face the consequences of her choices. The next morning, I looked again at the photos I had taken of the documents. Then I looked at Mark's number in my phone's contact list. I had it because months ago, Jessica had used my phone to call him when hers died, to let him know she'd be late for work. At the time, I thought nothing of it. Now, it felt different. I didn't have an elaborate plan. I just made a decision in the heat of my anger. I wrote a short text. I think you should see this. It's important for your health. I attached all the photos of the lab results, including the page showing the positive VDRL, and I hit send. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then the read receipt appeared. He didn't reply right away. In that instant, I felt a strange mix of emotions, a grim satisfaction on one hand, and a knot of nervousness on the other. I knew perfectly well that I was crossing a line, and I understood that once it was done, there was no taking it back. I turned off my phone and got ready to go out. I went straight to an urgent care clinic to get tested. I asked for a full STI panel. I didn't want to wait days for an appointment, so I paid out of pocket to be seen that same day. While I waited, my mind kept replaying the last few months. The arguments, Jessica's phrase, I have expensive tastes and you can't handle that, her decision to leave, the move, and now the confession about that night. It was all forming a clear narrative of contempt and replacement, but what really worried me at that moment was much simpler. The possibility that I had been exposed to something without my knowledge. At the clinic, they took the samples and explained that the results would be ready in a few business days. I walked out of there with a strange sense of vulnerability, something I had never felt so acutely before. When I turned my phone back on, I saw several missed calls. One was from Jessica, the other was from a number I didn't have saved, although it wasn't hard to guess who it was. I didn't return either call. Shortly after, I received a text from Mark. It was short and direct. I need to talk to you. Nothing else. I had no idea what he wanted. Maybe to confirm the information, maybe to confront me, or maybe just to get an explanation. Jessica had also sent a barrage of texts. Some were pleading, others were vaguely threatening. She said that what I had done was a serious invasion of her privacy, that I could get into legal trouble, that those documents were confidential. And maybe she was right, but at that moment, I wasn't thinking about legal or moral consequences. The only thing I cared about was my own health and processing the fact that our 4-year relationship had ended not just over money or differences, but because of much more serious betrayals. I didn't answer either of them that day. I just waited. I thought that by sending the results to her boss, I had closed the chapter. I was wrong. The real consequences were just beginning. The following days were a constant, anxious wait. I continued to ignore calls from both Jessica and Mark. The only thing that mattered was getting my own results. 3 days later, an email with a link to my patient portal arrived from the clinic. I opened the file with a mix of dread and resignation. I checked every line carefully. HIV, negative. Hepatitis B and C, negative. Gonorrhea and chlamydia, negative. When I reached the last line, I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. VDRL, non-reactive, negative. I felt the weight that had been crushing me for days suddenly lift. I sat there for several minutes, just processing the news. I had spent nights imagining worst-case scenarios that were now completely ruled out. The most logical explanation was simple. We had always used protection. Jessica never liked hormonal birth control because she said it affected her mood, so we had agreed to use condoms from the start. In that moment, I was profoundly thankful for that decision. I didn't text her to tell her my results. I didn't feel I owed her that peace of mind. I thought everything would be left behind then, but once again, I was wrong. One afternoon, around 6 o'clock, someone started knocking insistently on my apartment door. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened it, I was met with a scene I never could have imagined. Mark was standing in my doorway, gripping Jessica tightly by the arm. Her face was puffy and stained with tears. He, on the other hand, was perfectly calm, with a cold, almost mocking expression. "I'm returning your girlfriend to you," Mark said without any introduction. I stood there, motionless for a few seconds, trying to understand what was happening. Jessica tried to pull away, but he held her firm. "What's going on?" I finally asked. I couldn't help but add with a touch of irony. "Weren't you two supposed to live happily ever after?" Mark let out a short, bitter laugh. "This woman gave me an infection," he said with disgust. "It makes me sick just looking at her. And you're probably just as bad as she is." I looked at him, my own tone flat. "I use protection," I replied. "My results are negative." He frowned. "Good for you," he answered. "Then you can have her. I'm done with her." He let go of her arm roughly, as if she were something contaminated. Jessica stumbled forward a step. Mark started to walk away, but then stopped. He turned back and held out his hand to her. "Give me the phone," he ordered. Jessica looked at him, confused. "What?" "The phone I bought you," he clarified. "You don't deserve it." Between sobs, she took the phone out of her purse and handed it over without an argument. Mark took it, glanced at it for a second, and then left without another word. The silence that followed was heavy. Jessica stood in front of me with a blank stare. She finally looked up and said in a small voice, "Please, help me." That phrase hit me harder than I expected. For 4 years, I had heard her use that same tone to ask for little things. Help moving a piece of furniture, a ride to an appointment, help with some paperwork. But now everything was different. "Don't even think about it," I replied calmly. "Goodbye, Jessica." And I closed the door. From the other side, I heard soft knocking and her crying for several minutes. I didn't open it. I stayed leaning against the door, taking deep breaths, trying to keep the feeling of guilt from mixing with the overwhelming sense of relief. After a while, the crying stopped. I heard her footsteps retreating down the hallway. I didn't see her again that day. It was the last time we spoke face to face. In the following weeks, I found out through mutual acquaintances how things had played out. Mark hadn't been discreet. From what I was told, he openly discussed what happened with several people at the company, painting himself as the outraged victim. I don't know if he acted that way out of anger, wounded pride, or simple cruelty. The truth is, the story spread like wildfire. Jessica not only lost her relationship with him, but she also became a pariah at work. Shortly after, she was fired. Officially, the reason given was a violation of internal policies, although to most people, the real reason was obvious. When I heard the news, I didn't feel happy, but I wasn't surprised. Months later, I found out she was getting medical treatment. Syphilis, when caught in time, is completely curable with antibiotics. Medically, her problem had a solution. Socially, however, the damage was done. Some friends asked me if I felt guilty for sending the results to Mark. The truth is, there's no simple answer. If I had reacted with perfect composure, I probably would have let Jessica handle the situation on her own. I would have focused on my own health, gotten my tests, and moved on. But I didn't act with composure. I reacted out of fear and anger. When I remember her saying, "I have expensive tastes and you can't handle that," I understand now that she wasn't just talking about money. She was talking about a worldview where people are disposable once they stop serving a function. What happened next was, in part, a consequence of that mindset. I don't pretend to be a perfect victim. I opened mail that wasn't mine and shared private medical information. I don't deny that. But it's also true that this information had direct implications for my health, and she had every intention of hiding it. In the end, the most important lesson I took from this whole story has nothing to do with infidelity or illness. It has to do with self-respect. For a long time, I tried to adapt to expectations that weren't mine. I worked more hours, took on more responsibilities, and tolerated comments that, looking back, were clear signs of contempt. At the time, I tried to justify it all. I thought that if I just tried a little harder, things would get better. But when someone tells you with total certainty that you are not on their level, the healthiest thing you can do is not try to prove them wrong. The real question is a different one. Why would you want to convince someone who has already decided you're not enough? Jessica chose a path focused on status, appearances, and the fantasy of a more luxurious life. I made a different choice. I closed the door when she came back. There was no reconciliation. There were no final apologies or long conversations to put a neat bow on the story. There were only consequences. Months later, I heard that she was physically fine. The treatment had worked, and her health was stable. We haven't had any contact since. I don't know where she lives now or what she does for a living. I also haven't felt the need to find out. Over time, my life returned to normal. There were no public scandals involving me, nor did anyone point fingers at me for what happened. Maybe because in the end, everyone had to face the consequences of their own actions. If anyone reads this far expecting a grand moral, they will probably be disappointed. There is no spectacular lesson. I can only say something simple. Sometimes, when someone tells you that you aren't up to their expensive tastes, the smartest thing you can do is let them go and let them discover for themselves the true cost of their choices. Comment. Hey everyone. Thank you for being here for such a heavy story. Your value is never determined by someone else's expectations or their bank account. Learning to draw a line is one of the kindest things you can do for your future self. We are all responsible for our choices, but we are not responsible for the choices of others. True healing does not come from getting even. Instead, it comes from reclaiming your own peace. Sometimes, the most difficult part is learning to be kind to ourselves again after being hurt. You have the power to close certain doors so you can open new ones that lead to better places. Ultimately, your inner peace is more valuable than any argument you could ever win. Always remember to protect your own well-being first. Thank you for listening, and I will see you in the next story. If you liked it, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.